Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming. My name is Aisha Dixon. I'm the director of the UCLA Emeriti Retiree Relations Center. So if you're here, you must have seen the advertisement or publicity for this program somewhere. So thank you for coming. We work side by side and hand in hand with our Retiree Association and our Emeriti Association. Especially with the program chairs who help organize and plan all these great, wonderful activities. So I just want to make sure everyone can mute themselves so that if there's a trash collector or gardener or cat or squirrel, we don't have a disruption for our guests. So I will have this Zoom recording on our YouTube channel. And as a registered participant, you'll get the email with that video. And if there's other links or other information that our speaker wants to send along with details about today's Zoom, I'll forward that information on in an email. So I'll introduce Michael Heafy, who is the program chair for the Retirees Association, and he can take it over for our speaker.
Hello, everyone, and welcome in. Glad to have you with us today. Michael Heafy, as Aisha said, chair of the program committee, the fun squad for the Retirees Association, and I welcome you all here. Let's see. This presentation by Margot Metzner was brought to us by Judith Tuck, who you might know, have heard from before. She's the president of the Retirees Association. So I'm going to pass this along to her. So stay tuned. We have more programs coming up during the summer. Yay, we do not rest. We do not take the summer off. So pay attention to the Retirees homepage for more upcoming events. Judith, please.
Hi there. Yes. Hi there, everybody. And I'm delighted to introduce Margot Metzner. Margot is a happily retired attorney who post-retirement from the law became a docent at both LACMA and the Getty Villa, where she has a very strong interest in the ancient world. So I am going to turn it over to Margot, who's going to bring us up close and personal with Egyptian goodies.
Thank you, Judith. And thank you all for being here. I'm going to talk this morning about two shows that relate to Egypt that have been at the Getty Villa. The first one relating to the Egyptian Book of the Dead, and the second one is a current exhibition with portrait sculpture from the 26th dynasty of Egypt. And I don't know if all of you or some of you have seen those shows, either of them. The first one is now closed, so you've missed your opportunity, but I'll hopefully bring it to life for you. And the second one is on view and will be on view for a couple of years. So you have plenty of time to go see it in person. But I'm going to push some buttons here and hopefully share my screen. There, let's see. Yes, here we are. And I need to get this and slideshow. Let's see, we want to play from current slide. Okay, there we are. All right, so that's what we're going to talk about this morning. Probably every culture throughout time has wrestled with the question of death. You know, is that it, or what happens after we die? Is there something else that can happen after we pass on? And the Egyptians were no different than anybody else thinking about that big question. And taking some of their cues from the natural world, where they observed how the sun rolls across the sky each day, then disappears at night, only to be reborn again the next morning, they thought, well, gee, maybe we too can be reborn. Not reborn on this earth, after all, we don't see our loved ones again after they pass on, but reborn in another place that the Egyptians called the field of reeds, the field of reeds. And just like everybody I think, worries about that transition from this world to the next, whatever place you want to call it, whether it's heaven for you or the field of reeds for the Egyptians. People worry about how you're going to make that transition. And, today, some people might say prayers for the repose of your soul, or in ancient times, the Greeks thought you should leave a coin to pay for that ferry boat ride that you might have to take to get to the next world. Or some people leave paper money that gets burned to pay for the provisions you'll need in the next life. Well, the Egyptians too wanted to ease that transition for their loved one into the next world, and they did that by equipping their tombs with written magic spells. Today, these spells are commonly called the Egyptian Book of the Dead, but that's kind of an unfortunate title. For one thing, as you're going to see in a minute, there is no book. It's not like a book of these spells. And for one thing, the other thing, the Egyptians would be horrified by all this focus on the dead or death. For the Egyptians, they didn't want to talk about death. They wanted to talk about eternal life. And the name, the Book of the Dead, is simply a name given to this corpus of written magic spells by a German archaeologist in the 19th century. And this name kind of just stuck. The Egyptians, as best we can understand it, called these spells for going forth by day. That is, spells to let you, not your mummy body, but your soul or spirit, leave the tomb and get to that happy new world. Now, no one thought that your mummy itself was going to get up and start walking around all of a sudden, but you needed your mummy body to be reborn each day. And I hope that will become clear by the end of this talk. The goal for everyone was to become an Akh, AKH, which is sort of an initiated or transfigured spirit that would have eternal life. And these spells that now make up this Book of the Dead that we talk about were used from about 1550 BC to 50 BC. So for a very, very long period of time. And I imagine all of you have been to the Getty Villa at one point or another, and you know that the Getty Villa is a collection of Greek and Roman art and some Etruscan art. It is not a collection of Egyptian art. But these excerpts from the Book of the Dead are all owned by the Getty Villa, and it turned out they had been languishing in storage since 1983, when they had been gifted to the Getty. And no one paid any attention to them because, well, we don't have an Egyptologist on staff, and so nobody had any interest in them. And for some reason, more recently, someone took a look at them and then called in a real Egyptologist from the University of Chicago who came out and took a look at them and said, "Oh my gosh, you have been sitting on this treasure trove." So that's why the Getty was motivated to put some of them in this special exhibition, which unfortunately is now closed. We don't know their complete provenance, but we know that at some point in the 19th century, these magic spells were owned by this very eccentric British gentleman, Sir Thomas Phillips. And he was apparently a real bibliophile who loved books and wanted to own one of every book and manuscript in the world. He spent all of his money acquiring a huge collection, some say 40 to 60,000 manuscripts and books, went into debt. And some people think it was the largest collection of books ever owned by a single individual. But on his death, his heirs started selling them off, and that's where the Getty's selection comes from his collection that was then sold off. So this was the entrance to the exhibition that we had. And I show you this slide, and you will see where this figure comes from in a moment. But it's nice to look at him nice and big here. Because he's one of the most important of the Egyptian gods. Maybe if some of you are Egyptian fans, you will recognize this is the god Osiris. And you can recognize this guy. He's by his, for one thing, well, for backing up for a minute, he's shown in that very traditional Egyptian view, right, where we see part profile and part frontal view. And Egyptians love to combine those two viewpoints. So we see his face in profile. You see the entirety of his eye, which is not terribly realistic if you're really looking at someone from the side. Then you see his torso from the front. You see this, collar necklace. The Egyptians were very fond of these beaded collar necklaces. And then he seems to again go down in profile. It almost looks like he has one leg there, doesn't it? He also wears this very tall crown. Looks to me sort of, I always think of it as a bowling pin, surrounded by two ostrich feathers, right? And then he's holding symbols of his authority in his hands. He's got a crook here and a flail, used for breaking up grain or coercing animals in his other hand, the crook and the flail. Well, Osiris, as I said, was a very important Egyptian god. And the story is that he was at one time the ruler of Egypt, but his brother named Seth became very jealous of his powers and ended up chopping poor Osiris into pieces and scattering those pieces all over Egypt. But women to the rescue, and Osiris's loyal wife named Isis, not the terrorist organization, but the goddess Isis, she found all those pieces of her husband and wrapped and bandaged him up and made him into, in essence, kind of the first mummy. And through her magic powers, and Egyptians were great believers in magic, brought her husband back to life again. They even had a son together. That was Horus, the falcon god you may be familiar with. And Horus became the ruler of Egypt, while dad Osiris became the ruler of the underworld. So Osiris is a very important figure for, these magic spells dealing with the Book of the Dead, because he was resurrected and he came back to life again. And in fact, so important was this idea of Osiris and resurrection that after you died, Osiris became part of your name. So they wouldn't refer to me as Margot. I would be the Osiris Margot after I passed on. All right, so we'll see more of him in a few minutes. But now we'll enter the show and start with the oldest magic spell in the show, which was this papyrus of Webenesre, a woman from about 1450 BC. So a really long time ago, 3,500 years ago. And you see immediately when I said we're not talking about a book as we think of a book with pages bound together. It is a scroll, okay? So the Book of the Dead are scrolls written on papyrus. And you can see this one's in kind of rough shape. We only have a fragment of it. This fragment we have is about 6 feet long. We don't know how long the original scroll would have been because it's lost to us. And you can see this one now has been mounted on some white cotton backing just to kind of help keep it in shape here. Every scroll was personalized. They were made for you. Each one is handmade and unique. There is a corpus of about 200 magic spells that people are aware of today, but nobody had a papyrus with all 200 spells on them. I think the longest one they've ever found had about 165 spells on it. Some just have one spell on it. But they were made uniquely for you. Some we think might have been pre-made and a space left for the name to be filled in later, but most of them were uniquely made. And whether they were made before you died or after you died, kind of commissioned by your relatives, we can't really be sure. Maybe it happened both ways. But each one would have been prepared by a scribe, and then they would be rolled up and left with you in your tomb. So these are magic spells to help you transition from this life to the next one. This one, you can see, is written in a kind of a funny looking language there. This is hieratic, a kind of cursive hieroglyphs. And for us, probably the most important or the most interesting part are the vignettes or the little pictures that are inserted into some of these scrolls. And this one has a series of pictures of, these are meant to be hills or mounds, each one protected by a special guardian. And these magic spells are meant to help Webenesre, who was a woman, make it through or get through these magic hills. And by knowing the name of the guardian of these mounds, that was going to give her the wherewithal to pass by without any threats happening to her. All right, then another scroll, also owned by a woman in the show, is this one from a woman named Ankesenasat, who was a sistrum player in a temple. And I show you this one. It doesn't have any interesting pictures in it, but you'll notice that there's some red writing interspersed. And they used both black ink and red ink to kind of make headings or maybe to alert you that we're now changing to a different spell. So the colors have meaning there. Probably the most popular scroll in the show, and my favorite, was this papyrus from a man named Pasharashaket. Much later, you can see the dates here, 375, 275 BC. So it's like, 1,000 years later than the first one we looked at. And you can see pretty long. Again, this is only an excerpt. We don't have the whole thing. It's not still with us in the world. But I'll show you a close-up of some of the scenes in this papyrus of this fellow, including this one, which is maybe one of the most famous scenes that you see over and over again in Egyptian art. It has to do with the Judgment Day. All right, so just like people today, some people might think, oh, there's, St. Peter standing there, guard at the pearly gates, and you have to, pass through. The Egyptians had a test also that you had to take to get to the next world. And in this test, we see on the right, our decedent, here he is standing there, and he's being led to the place of judgment by this goddess, Ma'at, and I think I have a close-up of this. Ma'at has a feather, an ostrich feather on her head. She is the goddess of truth and justice. So she's escorting our fellow, Mr. Pasharashaket, to the place of judgment. And here, of course, you recognize there's Osiris sitting on his throne. All right, so you're ready to be judged. What's going on here? So Ma'at is leading Pasharashaket over to this scale. Can you see that there's a scale here? There's a crossbar and there are two pans hanging down. And underneath the scale, we have two Egyptian gods. Here's Anubis, the jackal-headed god. Anubis was the god of embalming and mummification. And he's the other fellow here is Horus, the falcon god. And what are they doing? What are they weighing? They are weighing the feather of truth from Ma'at against your heart. And the heart was one organ generally not removed during the mummification process. When you were mummified, they would generally take out your stomach, intestines, liver, and lungs. The heart was left in because you needed it for this test. And what are they doing? Well, you can kind of figure it out, right? They're weighing your heart against the feather of truth and justice. Were you a good person or not so good? If the scale balances, if it's equal, then you are golden. You are ma'at karu, or true of voice, and you may proceed. If the scale is out of whack, either way, it's out of whack, then you are in deep trouble. You are in deep trouble. And here they are again weighing. I have to go. That's one more here. And then you see this creature here. Looks kind of strange looking. This is Ammit. And Ammit is supposedly this demon creature that's there to eat your heart, gobble it up, if you don't pass the test. And Ahmed supposedly has the head of a crocodile, the body of a lion, the rear of a hippo. I don't think it looks much like a hippo here, but you get the idea. It's this kind of composite creature ready to gobble up your heart if you don't pass the test. Here is another god with an ibis head, right? This is the god Thoth or Thoth. He was the god of the moon and wisdom and writing and record keeping, kind of like a scribe. And you can see he's got a scroll in his hand here, and he is reporting the results to Osiris. What are the results here? Well, you'll be happy to know, and no one would probably buy a scroll where it didn't balance appropriately, right? That we have from the hieroglyphs above, we know exactly what happened here. Thoth says, before you I come, Lord of eternity, to you I have brought the Osiris Pasharashakat. He is true of voice, and his heart is safe upon the scale without fault found. And then Osiris replies, welcome to the beautiful West. Why the West? The West was the place of the setting sun, the place of the dead here. And I show you kind of a close-up of the hieroglyphs here. I can't read hieroglyphs, I can read some of them, but I know this says recitation by Thoth, right? You can see the ibis bird, right? It gives some of his titles, and then it has this hieroglyph, which is the hieroglyph for scribe, the hieroglyph for a scribe, and here's a close-up of it. And it's interesting because it has two kind of ink pots, right? A water pot, kind of for mixing your inks, and here's a brush. Here's your brush. So it's an easy hieroglyph to spot when you're looking at them. The word is sesh, it means scribe here. And I show you this excerpt, this is from a sarcophagus in LACMA's collection, but it just is interesting. You'll see the same scene. Can you recognize it? There's the crossbar, here's the pans, here's Anubis. They're weighing here the figure of Ma'at with a feather on her against the guy's heart, right? And there's our friend Thoth, the scribe, right? Reporting the results again. So again, this scene is repeated many, many times in Egyptian art. Okay, we talked about the field of reeds, right? That's that happy place you want to get to, not heaven with puffy white clouds, but it's the field of reeds. What does it look like? Well, here we have some vignettes or some illustrations. These are from the same scroll we've been looking at with the Judgment Day. And you can see the field of reeds looks like Egypt itself. It's full of fertile black soil and crops growing. And so here is our decedent. There's Pasharashakat, and he is plowing the fields, right? He is sowing the seeds. He is growing grain. Look how the crops, they grow super tall. It's a wonderful, happy place. The crops grow marvelously. There's piles of grain guarded by a heron bird. Here's our decedent. He's got his hands raised up. That's always a gesture of prayer or respect before some kind of maybe Nile god there. Some confusing scenes on the bottom with these strange looking boats with the snake prows, right? But you see the water underneath. I'm not quite sure what this means. Looks like a staircase on one, a throne seat on the other. These are irrigation channels here, but you get the idea. The field of reeds is a wonderful place. The crops grow super tall. And of course, one of your jobs there is to be growing the food for yourself and all the other initiated spirits and the gods who have made it there. This is noble. This is pious work. Everybody's happy to participate. And on the right, you see some more vignettes, right, with our decedent here. Let's see if I have a close-up of that. Whoops. Go. Yeah. Here's our decedent again, and he's got his hands raised up in prayer, respect for, there's Osiris. You recognize him with the bowling pin on his head. And standing behind Osiris, there's Isis, Osiris's loyal wife, the one who found all those pieces and wrapped and bandaged husband up. And she is recognizable by what to me looks sort of like a chair on her head, a chair there. That's the hieroglyph for her name, Isis there. And then more gestures of respect and some offerings being made there. Okay, moving along, we're still in the same scroll. The same scroll has more scenes. This one at the top kind of lost to us. Here's a scene with a guy holding looks like a ball over his head. It's not a beach ball, it's the sun, right? The sun is all important, Re or Ra, the sun god, being worshipped by some baboons here. And again, taking their cue from the natural world, the Egyptians thought of baboons, I guess they're known for kind of in the early morning, like to bask in the sun and make a lot of squawking noises when they do that. And so the Egyptians thought, the baboons are worshiping Re, the sun god here. So the baboons are often thought of as attendants to Re, and sometimes they are representations of Thoth himself, that moon god, the god of writing and the moon and wisdom and writing, so forth, because the moon is kind of secondary to the sun, and so they think of the baboon as being maybe Thoth in his role as the moon, secondary to the sun. And up here we have these are Ba birds, human-headed birds. The Egyptians had a very complicated view of your soul or spirit. It had multiple parts, and one part of your soul or spirit was your Ba. It was thought of sort of as like everything that makes you uniquely you, kind of your personality. And when you died, it could fly off and it could flit about, but it needed to come back to your tomb at night. But it's shown as a bird because I think to give you that idea of mobility of the soul, to fly off and to come back. And then in the bottom scene, here's our decedent and his wife. They are now being worshipped by somebody as bringing them an offering here. So they have made it to that happy place. They've become initiated spirits or ox. Okay. All right, and these are just close-ups of these scenes that I was showing you. In this one, I should point out, you see these funny little things, these cones on their heads. What's that all about? These are meant to be unguent cones, kind of cones of perfumed fat with some herbs and spices and stuff mixed in. And the idea was that it would gradually melt and leave this wonderful perfume scent over your hair or wigs or clothes. And people go, did people really wear these unguent cones on their heads? And experts are kind of divided about that. Some say yes, and some say, no, we just see them in images because they're kind of like a halo, maybe to represent your divine status. They have found, however, mounds of perfumed fat on some mummies' bodies. And so, but that still kind of begs the question whether they actually wore those things during life or it was something simply for the funeral or the funerary offering. Okay, well, we've been looking at papyrus scrolls with these magic spells from the Book of the Dead, but you could also write these spells on figurines with these little guys called Shabtis. Shabtis or ushabtis, you can call them either one, are little figures that were meant to go inside your tomb to also aid you in this transition to the afterlife. And you can see, this is one figure I'm showing you from the front and from the back. He looks like a mummy, doesn't he? He's so narrow here in his body, and only his hands are kind of sticking out. You can see he's got some tools in his hands, a hoe and a pick. There's a seed bag over his shoulder here. So what's this all about? Well, the idea was that you might have some helpers, some avatars, some mini yous to help you do that work in the field of reeds. It's noble, it's pious work. There's nothing wrong with this manual labor, but wouldn't it be nice if you had some helpers? So the Shabtis are there in your tomb to help you do this. And you can see there's writing on them. This is the Shabti spell, magic spell number 6, which basically says, in essence, if you are called upon to do some work in the field of reeds, the Shabti will raise his hand and say, "Here I am, ready to report for duty." So they're like your little assistants. They're they're your avatar. They have your name on them, but they are your helpers. This Shabti came from a particular tomb of this fellow named Neferabri-Sanith. He had, when his tomb was found in 1929, 336 of these figurines, these Shabtis in his tomb. We don't know how many he might have had originally because his tomb had already been broken into and looted. If you were really lucky, if you were rich, if you were wealthy enough, you would want to have 401 of these figurines in your tomb. 365, one for each day of the week, plus 36 overseer Shabtis. You could have one, you might have 401 if you were lucky, right? But again, they have spells written on them. Well, there's one more place that these magic spells might be found, and that is, most extraordinarily, I think, of all, they might be written right on the linen strips that were used to turn you into a mummy. You know, no toilet paper involved, right? We're talking about linen cloth, and the linen cloth could actually be decorated, be written with magic spells as well. And here's a close-up from one of those in the show. And again, you're going to recognize now the scenes, right? Because we've been talking about this one with the divine figure with the sun on his head, the bawbirds, the baboons, kind of worshiping the sun here again, more worshiping of the sun. Sun, you can't have any crops growing, you can't have life without the sun. So that's all important to the Egyptians. And of course, the other necessary thing for life would be water. That's why the Nile was so important, right? It was the overflowing of the Nile every year that deposited all that rich black soil. So we have a boat here, a boat here. So what's going on? Well, in this boat, we have our decedent. This is a fellow named Osiris, worshiping these riders in the boat. And we have Re, the daytime sun, Atum, the evening sun, and Khepri, the dawn sun. So kind of 3 versions of the sun here. And the Egyptian belief was that during the day, Re, the sun, it's rolling across the sky, right? We can see that happening. But Re was riding in a boat. His solar boat was riding across the sky every day. But what happens at night? What happens at night? Well, first I'm going to show you this strip here. I just show it to you because do you see the numbers, the slash marks here? It looks like the Roman numeral 3 slash marks. These strips were sometimes numbered to let the embalmer or the mummifier to know the order in which they were to be applied. So maybe some scenes, some magic spells were meant to go closer to your body and some were more on the outer layers. So some of them have numbers actually on them. Okay, but what's happening to Re at nighttime? Well, the Egyptian belief was that Re got out of his solar boat rolling across the sky and he got into his nighttime boat to traverse the underworld. And the underworld was a place of danger and chaos and all sorts of bad things were going on down there, including this monster demon snake called Apep. And this figure looks like a big giant cat of some sort, a feline creature. That's Re. He can change form. And he's fighting this demon chaos Apep. And of course, every night he has to engage in this battle, and every night he's going to win. Okay, Re wins. So he is down in the underworld fending off chaos. And the other thing he is doing in the underworld at nighttime is Re is meeting up with Osiris, right? The Lord of the underworld. And from that union, we don't see a picture of it here, but you have to imagine it, a union of Re and Osiris at night Ray is getting that kind of regenerative spark to be reborn the next morning so he can get out of the underworld and get in his solar boat and traverse the sky once again. All right, so that was the Egyptian belief for the sun, what was going on with it. What about you? Okay, well, it's kind of a similar belief. So here is our decedent laid out on this wonderful funerary bed. It looks like a lion, right? You see the form of it? It looks like a lion bed. Underneath, we see some canopic jars or sacks holding his mummified organs here. And the idea was, well, why are you being made into a mummy? Well, the idea was that just like Ray is reuniting with Osiris in the underworld, something has to happen for you too, in order for you to be reborn. So your soul, your ka, your ba, these are aspects of your soul, are free to fly off after you die, but you need them to come back to you if you are going to be reborn. Your ba, your ka, have to reunite with your Osirian form, which is your mummy body. So think of it as sort of like in the Sistine Chapel, the ceiling with God reaching out to Adam to give him that spark of life. So your ka has to come back to your mummy body at night and to kind of get regenerated. So your mummy is your Osirian form, right? Ray reunites with Osiris, your ka reunites with your mummy, so you too can be reborn. Okay, that was kind of a whirlwind through that. And I show you this other strip, right? It looks like, oh, is that blood? No, this is probably resin or from the kind of the resins that were used to kind of make that glue to get you the sticky stuff used for the mummification process. But it's so, I don't know, just fascinating to think that we still can see these remnants of, what was actually going on these thousands of years ago with these linen strips and so forth. Okay. Any questions about that? Or I'm going to transition to this other next exhibit with this.
Actually, Margot, there were a couple of questions placed in the chat.
Okay.
Judith asked, on slide 23, there was a triangular figure above a couple of the human figures. Is this a pyramid in the background?
Ooh, and I don't know what slide 23 was because I don't have any numbers here.
Oh,
is there a description more? Or Judith, do you want to?
It's back a little further. Let's see. That's it, right there.
Oh, this. Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. I don't have the answer to that. Yeah.
Okay, because to me it looks like
in a room with a roof.
Yeah, I think it's maybe a room with a roof. Yeah, because pyramids were so much earlier in time.
Right.
Right. So like 2500 BC. So that would be, 1,000 years or more, well, 2,000 years before this scroll was created. So yeah, I think it's probably I think maybe it's just a roof there. Yeah. Kind of looks like a pyramid though, sure. All right.
Side view.
Questions? Other questions?
Yes, one more. Nancy was asking about baboons in Egypt at the time when they are depicted in your slides.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm gonna, I'm not an expert on baboons. I imagine that there were baboons around, but I don't think they were imagining this, I think they were seeing this in real life. So baboons, yes.
So they would basically take what they observed actually happening and then place that on their inscriptions or their drawings.
So right, their beliefs, I think, were formulated in large part. Many of their beliefs are formulated from what they observed in nature.
Okay. All right.
And I wanted to also ask, I think there were mummified baboons that were
Oh,
found.
yeah. The Egyptians were great on mummifying animals, right? Yeah, they love to make mummies out of animals. Absolutely. Lots of cat mummies. Yeah. Okay. Anything else? Or I'm going to move on.
Go for it.
Okay, the second exhibition, which is still on view, has to do with portrait sculpture from the Saite dynasty, the 26th dynasty, and the dates you can see here, 664 to 526 BCE. This is the beginning of Egypt's late period, okay? And, 600 BC sounds like a very long time ago to us, but you can see in the context of Egypt, this is very late in time, right? You think of the pyramids, we were just talking about like 2500, right, BCE. Or you think about Ramses II or the boy King Tut, they were about 600 or 700 years earlier in time. So this really is late in the context of Egypt. The Saites, well, right before the Saite dynasty, Egypt had been ruled by Nubians from the Sudan, or called Cush, the land of Cush in the Bible. And the Nubians ruled all of Egypt, all the way up to the Mediterranean for about 80 years. They were then pushed out by the Neo-Assyrians, who installed these vassals they thought they could control on the Egyptian throne. Those were the Saites. But the Saites soon gained their independence and did their own thing. So the Saite dynasty, the 26th dynasty, was a time of prosperity, of economic growth, of temple building, of expansion of the government, and it was a time of artistic creation. And so what this exhibit focuses on is portrait sculpture from the 26th dynasty of non-royal individuals. Here's a map just to show you Sais was like their capital city, right in the Delta. You see Lower Egypt and Upper Egypt, and remember the Nile flows this way. That's just why we have to call this Upper, and this is Lower Egypt. There's another dot here for Naucratis. This was a Greek trading colony that the Saites permitted. This was a time of a lot of trade between Egypt and Greece, especially the Eastern Greeks on the coast of the Aegean and what is now Turkey. Portrait sculpture. Okay, but what is a portrait? For us, we think of a portrait as a likeness of a person, something that's going to inform us not just what they look like, but maybe something of their status. Maybe a good portrait would even tell us something about their character or their personality. So we think of a portrait today as something, it's going to help us, the viewer, know the person depicted. Got to get away from that idea for the Saites, okay, or for Egyptian portrait sculpture. For them, a portrait was not really to inform the viewer, but to do something for the person being depicted. All right, that seems like kind of having it backwards, but you'll see what I mean, and I think in a few minutes. So think about the Shabti, right? These are two different Shabtis. They look very much like the one you saw before, but remember, these are portraits. These are you, right? They are your avatar. They have your name on them. They are you. But again, they're not like a portrait that we would think of, right? They're meant to do something for you. These are your helpers to do all that work in the field of reeds, right? These are not portraits. Okay, I show you these simply because they're so beautiful, and they're part of the show to show you kind of the wealth of the Saite dynasty and how the beautiful objects people could afford. These are canopic jars, which you probably know are meant to hold the organs that were removed during the mummification process. So these are empty today. There's no organs inside them, but they weigh about 31 pounds each, and each one, stomach, intestines, liver, and lungs, so you have 4 of them. This one with the baboon head I know is for the lungs, and they each have the head of the god in charge of protecting that particular organ. So the god Hapi goes with the lungs there with the baboon head. And they're made of Egyptian alabaster or calcite, right? And again, they have inscriptions on them telling the person that owned them.
So they're actually carved
Yeah, they're
rather
carved.
than molded or.
Yeah, they're carved. They're carved. Yeah, they're stone. And they're heavy. They're about 31 pounds. Also to go, these would go in your tomb, but nearby, maybe in your mortuary temple, you might have a funerary stela. This is a funerary stela, and stela just means an upright inscribed stone, or that is going to kind of function sort of like a gravestone might for us today. And you think you can see it almost looks like a gravestone with that rounded top here. And then we have a line of figures there. Okay, it's a line of figures. And this gravestone belongs to a man named Ankefenmut. And there he is. Okay, this is a portrait of Ankefenmut. He's got his hands raised up in prayer, right? And he's facing a row of gods. And now you recognize the first one. Oh, that's that skinny guy with the bowling pin. That's Osiris there. Ankefenmut. Okay, there he is. He's got kind of looks like a shaven head there. He's got a collar necklace on, a long kilt kind of skirt, bare torso, kind of strap across there. Okay, there he is. But portrait. I don't think this is detailed enough. You're going to ever recognize him out of a lineup, right? Facing this row of gods and goddesses. There's Isis, by the way, with the chair on her head. Okay, what is the purpose of this? Well, you see the hieroglyphs now. And remember, hieroglyphs are signs or symbols that can represent a phonetic sound or a whole word. And these ones tell us kind of what is the purpose of this? Why have this portrait of Ankefenmut here? What is this for? Well, the inscription is the standard offering formula, which you see over and over again in Egyptian art. It begins with the words, an offering the king gives to Osiris. A king gives all the offerings. King owns everything. All the offerings come from the king. And the king gives an offering to a god, typically Osiris. It could be another god, with the idea that he's going to give him some goodies, and that God is then going to pass on those good things to you, for use in your afterlife. It's a kind of a wish list of the provisions that you think you might need for the next life, right? And so this is Ankefenmut's kind of wish list that he would like. And I'm happy to tell you that everybody in their wish list, part of the standard offering formula, gets beer and bread. Beer and bread are always automatic. It's like meat and potatoes. Everybody wants that. And then you can kind of, customize it to what you would like, whether it's oxen or fowl or milk or incense or honey or whatever. These are your wish list of provisions that you would like for the next, to get you, satisfy you in the next world. This wish list is as good as the real deal, because for the Egyptian belief, words and image had the capacity to become the real thing. So just by having the words here, it's as good as if people were actually piling up goodies at Ankefenmut's tomb. Having the words is just as good as the real deal. And I show you here kind of my depiction of the first hieroglyphs that we saw there. This is king, this is offering, this is gives, and the king always comes first. So his symbol comes first. An offering the king gives, and you'll see it, right? So you recognize it, an offering the king gives. And then the other one you can easily recognize, this is the voice offering, the prayer for beer and bread, and then it gets personalized on everything else that you would like. So you saw that one here. All right, there's your voice offering, your prayer for beer and bread, and then it gets on to the other things that you would like. And here's another funerary stela. This one is on wood, and look at the paint, how it's survived all of these thousands of years, right? This is for a man named Panes. And here he is. He's got one of those unguent cones on his head, right? He's got his hands raised up in prayer. He's facing a line of gods and goddesses. There's Osiris again. There's Isis. You recognize them now. And what does it say? It says the same sort of stuff. There's an offering the king gives, right, to Osiris with the hopes he's going to pass that on, right? This voice offering of beer and bread and all of these other goodies that Panis would like for his next life, right? So portrait. Again, not a portrait like we would think of, but a portrait meant to kind of be for his wish list that he needs to sustain himself in the next world. And here's just a close-up of that again. It's just amazing to think these colors have survived. And the wood too. All right. This is a giant sarcophagus. It weighs 12,000 pounds, 6 tons. It's the heaviest object ever installed at the Getty Villa. All of the objects in this show, I should tell you, are not owned by the Getty. They come to us from the British Museum, which you know has a huge collection of Egyptian art, so much stuff they could easily afford to loan us stuff, and they're not going to miss it because they're going to have it at the Getty Villa for 3 years. This is the lid for the sarcophagus, okay? It's shown separate standing up, but you have to imagine this goes on top of this. And this is a portrait, another portrait of the fellow. We know his name from the inscriptions here. His name was Nesisut. Now this looks like a very idealized Egyptian face, not much detail there, but that's a portrait, but it has a purpose. Why bother to carve his sarcophagus lid to look like him or an idealized him, right? Well, it's for the same purpose you make a mummy, right? Your ka, that part of your spirit, needs to come back to you at night so you can be reborn the next day. And if there's no place for your ka or your ba to come back to, what's going to happen? Hopefully you have a mummy, but if something happens to your mummy body, this is a substitute. This will work just as well. So it's kind of to alert the ka and the ba, here I am, come back, so you can be, I can be reborn the next day. It's a substitute you, it's kind of a protective backup for your mummy, if anything should happen to it. And you can see there's more carvings on the sarcophagus. I should show you, this is what we're looking at here. Here, again, right, the same idea. Here is the guy, here's Nesisut. He's got his hands up in prayer. He's facing a line of gods and goddesses, right? He's just showing his piety, his devotion here, right? All of those good things. Of the works we've been looking at so far have all been in the kind of funerary context. There are also temple sculptures that would have been placed in temples also as portraits. And this is a portrait sculpture of a man named Noctorheb, which would have come from a temple. And is just another view of him. He's got a beautiful face, beautiful body. You can see the sculptor has done a great job of kind of using the striations in the stone to kind of mimic the flesh there. He's kneeling, I know, kind of what I think of as an uncomfortable looking pose with on his toes there. But you can see it's kind of a gesture of piety. He looks very solemn here, forward looking. And the idea is he is placing himself in the temple so that he can absorb for all of eternity all those rituals and prayers and offerings and all those good things that are going on in the temple. And it will kind of help him do something for him for all eternity here. And a beautiful face, right, carved. It looks almost as if he is smiling. This is kind of a hallmark of Saite portrait sculpture. It's called the Saite smile, a little bit like the Mona Lisa. And if it's the same time period as the Archaic period in Greece, you may be familiar with the archaic smile on many Greek works of the same time period. Same idea with the Greek sculptures. And on his head, this is called a bag wig. It's not actually a wig. It's kind of a cloth covering. Egyptians did, though, wear wigs. They often shaved their heads to get rid of lice or to keep cooler, and they wore human hair wigs. But this is called a bag wig, kind of a covering over his head there. And here from the back, you can see all these inscriptions again. It tells us something about Nocturab. It gives us some of his titles. He was the chief lector priest, supervisor of the secrets in the house of the morning, administrator of the magicians in the house of life, keeper of the diadem and adorning the king. He had all sorts of wonderful titles. He must have been a big mucky muck at the time. And he gets this beautiful portrait sculpture of himself. These are also, even though this guy's lost his head, these are also portrait sculptures, but you can see each figure is carrying what looks like a box with a figure inside of it. These are called neophorus sculptures. These figures are also from temples. These would be priests, and they are carrying these naos sculptures of holding these kind of shrines with images of gods or goddesses inside of them. And again, this would be one way of showing your piety, your devotion, your closeness to the gods here. So you would have your portrait sculpture associating yourself with the god or goddess to show your piety and earn all that good karma for all an eternity here. And we do know in real life that gods and images of gods and goddesses were kept in temples in these little shrines, like cupboards, and they would be opened every morning, and the priest's job would be to, wash them and give them offerings and so on and so forth. So these are kind of miniature versions of that. And finally, two heads to kind of end the show with. We don't know who this is from. A beautiful head from a temple sculpture, right? It would have been in a temple. I think they think this one came from the Temple of Karnak, Thebes. It's so beautiful. Some people think, oh, doesn't it look like a woman? But it's a man. A 19th century archaeologist did think it was a woman, but no, it's a man with a kind of this interesting wig that kind of flies out like that. Beautiful kind of low relief eyebrows. And notice how the eye goes past, kind of like eyeliner on the eye there. A beautiful idealized face of some unknown person. Looks very youthful, very beautiful. But it harks back to, this is a head from the Old Kingdom, thousands of years earlier in time. But look how similar in style it is, right? And Egyptian art, wasn't like Western art. Like we think of Western art as being a progression. You go from the Baroque period to Rococo to neoclassical, and you can date art just by looking at it. And you can say, I can tell that comes from this period, right? Egyptian art doesn't go that way. It's not a continuum. So the Saite portrait sculpture often was archaizing or looking back to much earlier kinds of forms, right? So this is Saite, this is Old Kingdom. All right, beautiful head though, right? And now compare it to this one. Completely different. Again, from somebody we don't know the name of, but this you can see is some elderly fellow, right? He's even got wrinkles on his eyelids here, wrinkles on his forehead. He's got sunken cheeks, some kind of wig over his head here. I'm not sure if it's a bag wig or just a wig. Big ears, right? Kind of just show I'm listening to you. This is also referencing an older style of art from the Middle Kingdom. These are two heads from the Middle Kingdom, and you can see the similarity. There was a pharaoh in the Middle Kingdom who said, you know what? I'm proud of my wrinkles. That just shows my age, my maturity, my wisdom, my life of experience. I want to be shown with my wrinkles here. So this is a Saite period sculpture, but harking back to the Middle Kingdom style here. And again, it's an ideal. It's just not the ideal of youth and beauty. It's the ideal of age and wisdom and maturity. So kind of two different ways of showing yourself, the ideal of youth and beauty or the ideal of age and wisdom, right? And I'm just going to end with a little plug. We have another show on now called Picture Worlds, which puts together Greek, Maya, and moche from Peru pottery, painted ceramics, and comparing the narratives and the imagery on that. It's a really cool show. So if you have a chance, please come and see it. It's on view until the end of July. Okay. I'm done. Questions? Comments? Anybody?
What the various materials that were used for some of the portrait sculptures?
Yeah, it's granite.
Granite?
I'm gonna end my screen here. Let's see, click to exit. Let's see. Oops, didn't mean to do that. Granite, alabaster. Yeah, you're not seeing marble, not marble. There was no marble.
Okay. And were they painted
all-
at all, or they were never painted?
Good question. I think that you know, certainly our stelas would have been painted. On the sculptures, probably some paint. Yeah, I think so. I'm not sure about that. We don't have any remnants. There's nothing I could point out to you to say, look for the paint here. But certainly the stela was painted. We saw some remnants on that. Yeah.
That's really
The
incredible
wooden
that
one
that
was all
survived.
beautifully painted, but even the stone one was painted originally.
Yeah, that they
Yeah.
survived is amazing.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Well, Margot, I want to
Yeah.
thank you so much.
Yeah, my
Somebody
pleasure.
put in the comment that it was fascinating that they learned so much. I know I think it's fascinating to see all of this, and it's the same issue we deal with today.
Yeah.
What happens to us after
we die? Exactly.
After we die? And maybe they have the right answer.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm looking to see any other questions.
No, there's one more comment. FYI, filmmaker Neil Gaiman used feather and heart ritual in his TV show American Gods. I'm not
Oh.
familiar with that show.
Hmm.
Can you help us out there, Carol?
Hmm.
If you were, there you are.
Hmm.
Yeah. And another comment is, love the hieroglyphics lesson.
Yeah. I've been trying to study some more on hieroglyphs and taking one of those online courses that's kind of helpful in deciphering them. But it always makes Egyptian art more meaningful, right? If you can go, oh, I recognize that, right?
The written looks so different from the chiseled or carved.
Right, right. Yeah. The hieratic, I have no clue about how to reading that. All of these from the Getty, the Book of the Dead, you know, scrolls that the Getty has inherited, they're all being translated by the Egyptologist from the University of Chicago, and there will be a catalog and a book about all of it. He can read everything. He can read even those that messy handwriting. The hieratic script.
Here's the answer. I guess Neil Gaiman. It was on HBO some years ago, and in his novel.
Oh. Well,
very interesting.
That's interesting. Yeah. So he was obviously paying attention to Egypt.
Right. Well, thank you so much,
Yeah,
Margot.
my pleasure.
We really appreciate it. And I
Okay.
learned a lot.
Okay. Well, have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
Thank you, everyone, for attending. We're so glad to have you with us. We'll be back with more later this summer, so stay tuned.
Margot, will you be sharing your slides or no?
I'm
With
happy to
Minister?
if anybody would like them.
Yeah, could you email them to Michael and then
Judith-
he can send them to me?
I have them already.
Oh,
Okay.
perfect.
Cool.
I
Yeah.
can send it
Please
on to
send
you,
them along.
Aisha.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank
happy to
you.
share.
Thank you,
you.
everybody.